Welcome to the BOGART Effect, a wealthy wisdom podcast. The following BOGART Effect podcast is intended for general information purposes only. The information discussed is no substitute for personalized investment advice from BOGART or another investment professional. Please see important disclosure information at the end of the presentation.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the BOGART Effect. I'm James Bogart. I've got Patrick with me today. We're going to be talking about right-sizing your life. This is probably one of the number one conversations I'm having with clients. And I know you mentioned it as well.
Likewise.
But, you get to this point where it's time to downsize, and there's a lot of considerations about it. So, I have this mental image, which is kids are out of the house. I've now got more freedom to go travel, do things, turnkey, low maintenance, walk outside, 80 degrees, no snow. Like I have this painted picture that is already 16 years out. I've got young kids, but it's one where as life goes through these transitions, I think it's important to start thinking about that painted picture, right? We're such a planning-centric firm, and we're engaging households way early in the life cycle of this conversation. But when I think about like a retirement plan, it's paint that picture. What's that vision? And each and every one of us has a different vision. Because I can tell you right now, my wife and I are probably at polar opposites with this conversation. Like she wants the big house for the kids to come back to. Whereas I want the 1,500 square foot condo.
Very different.
So I want turnkey, low maintenance, not having to do anything. It's amazing. So I think, let's frame this discussion though in a way that I think our viewers can really relate to. So talk to me a little bit about why the downsize?
So for a lot of folks and the majority of conversations that we're having with clients about this topic, for the majority of people in the wealth accumulation phase, the wealth building phase, the house is the primary asset for a lot of people. It's the place where the kids are. It's the place where the kids' friends are. Maybe holidays are there. It becomes the central nucleus for all of the family's dynamic for the most part. But then you talked about things are going to change. Folks go to university, parents may change, grandchildren may factor in. And all of the sudden, getting on the lawnmower, shoveling the snow, which was once a family activity, is now just a you activity. And that's a totally different dynamic than it was during that period. And so for retirees, the house comes from this fundamental piece of not only your wealth and the balance sheet, but the family to a major friction point.
I like the word choice you said there, nucleus, right? Because and again, obviously we're men, but female has a different perspective. My wife, it's a nesting thing, right? And that is her home, and that is her nest, and this becomes a very financial as well as emotional conversation as we get into it. But I want to pull on that thread of friction, right? At some point when you get into a more dynamic element of life where you want to be able to do other things and have more time, time's our most valuable asset, having something that requires a tremendous amount of maintenance, oversight, upkeep, right? That might become less and less important, right? So it's balancing, that dynamic. And let's be honest, you already mentioned a little bit too, as we age, we call it the frailty tax, right? All right, so I'm 40, right? and I'll tell you, this snowstorm got me, right? I came back in town. I fortunately missed the snow, but I came back in town and had to do the driveway and walkway. First shovel in, I pull a muscle in my back. and of course, it's why am I doing this? But I was down for and again, I'm 40, right? So I think about my vision, once kids are out of the house, is definitely not including snow. So South Florida looks really nice, or Texas.
But I think it brings up a good point. I think most people in retirement don't envision themselves on a ladder fixing the gutter that's overflowing. And because, number one, it becomes a significant health risk.
100%.
And that's we'll get to that later in today's conversation. But the other part of it is, a lot of these homes become very expensive to keep we're going to talk about mortgages in a little bit, but take that out. When you're no longer cutting the grass and you have to hire a landscaping crew to come or someone to fix a basic appliance, I mean, in today's age, those are costs that
Death by
really
1,000 cuts. Death by 1,000 cuts.
Perfectly said.
Yeah.
And that pushes the plan. And when we think about spend, we talk so much about what's the spend, what's the lifestyle going to be. It's a missed line item almost all the time.
It falls into that kind of housekeeping slush bucket, which I was going through an exercise with our house, and it was interesting. Like when I compare the last 3 or 4 years, that number can change by almost 50%. Like you have an appliance go out or you have a HVAC go out. We had one go out, and it's like all of a sudden you got an extra $15,000, $20,000 that you weren't budgeting. And the bigger the house, the more of those types of things that you have that arises. So there becomes a progression in timeline when this is almost a very natural conversation. Like you heard me with my vision was when the kids leave the house, right? But that may or may not be one of our clients' visions, right? Like, and in a lot of cases, I do highly encourage someone to get through whatever the life event is, retirement, usually sell of a business, something like that. Get through that life event first before making a decision like this. But let's talk a little bit about that timeline.
So I'm glad you brought that up. A lot of folks will say to us, they'll say, I'm not ready to even talk about a transition out of the house because it comes back to all the memories are stored there. Every room, every place you go. Oh, remember when the kids or remember when we did this. It's a very sentimental place. Unfortunately, we've both seen the counter to that is if we refuse to have some of these conversations, we might be forced to move out when it's not on our terms from a health event or whatnot. And that turns into a mess. Number one, because where do we go? And that's a separate conversation. But it also makes the dynamic with the children, how much stuff you have, because when you think about some of the primary residents today, you're probably not taking that to a downsized home. What happens to that stuff? And so I think the best way we can be advising clients is we're not saying you need to do anything, but let's have a conversation. Let's start to think about, hey, if we start to go down the path, what's that going to look like? And it's never too early to start. That being said, as you talked about retirement, when we get to that timeline, there's so many things we're thinking about. We don't necessarily need to make too many decisions at once, but we want to put it on the docket.
Well, and I personally like to lead this conversation with what is it? I talk about this painted picture and this vision, but the reality of it is what is the type of lifestyle that you want to have? And then I start thinking about the necessities versus the nice to haves versus some of the elements that a lot of people just don't even consider in these decisions. Some of it is like social. I'll tell you right now, for me, it's golf. If I don't have golf within close proximity to my home, wherever it is, I'm not interested. Right. Like, and I learned this when I went into South Florida. It's very difficult to find a country club in South Florida. And that had an absolute impact on my enjoyment of being there altogether. So it was like, all right, Miami, for example, is not where I want to be. Let's start looking at other areas. Right. But so golf is a great example. My wife is social. She needs activities. She needs groups that she can participate in, right? Like, so looking at those are important. But I think the ones that don't get discussed enough are access to medical, right? And especially when we're talking about someone's retirement, some of these communities are phenomenal, right? Like beautiful views, economically, very affordable. But they don't have a medical system anywhere nearby. And if they don't have the workforce to staff said medical system, that becomes a big issue. I also think comes back to this conversation around the type of retirement that you want to have. If you want to travel, you probably should be near an airport, right? Like, and like I think of clients we've worked with where, they're moving to areas that are 2+ hours away from a commercial airport. And next thing you know, like they're not doing trips because that added a tax, if you will, on every trip. It's like, well, I don't really want to do the Europe trip because it's an extra 4+ hours of driving. Plus I got to deal with the airports and all the things, right? So it's one of those where you need to get that alignment associated with the trip. And then let's not ignore family, right? Like,
Yep.
and I've also seen the school of thought of like, let's buy the retirement home where we would want the kids to come to, or the kids would want to come to. More of that magnet versus, kind of the mandate. And every area is a little different. Like some of these communities, like where my dad has a place in Naples, like it's a resort, right? Like 3 pools and 25 tennis courts, 3 golf courses. Like it's very, very nice. And I would say, it's that magnet, right?
Yep.
But that might not be your vision, right? Like,
and one of the blocks that the majority of our clients have is they get to retirement. We talked about the priority and making this conversation a priority, and then they hit us with the counter. I don't know where the kids are going to be. And I think one of the things to really think about is, number one, is that a priority? Being close to the kids, potentially grandkids, where they may be, because with younger generations, they're very transient now, and not front-running a decision counting, oh, well, we're going to move here and the kids are definitely going to be there too.
Yep.
They may not. And it's sometimes awkward, but worth a conversation to say, hey, before we uproot, what's your plan? What are your thoughts? Not to put pressure or lock anybody in, but in an effort for transparency to make sure there's no regret once that second house or downsize is done.
Well, and I think when a lot of people are in the accumulation phase, right, like they are going to be transient just by the nature of their job, right? Like I think a lot of the Fortune 500 companies that we work with the employees of, most of them have moved multiple times. Like it's not like once or twice, it's like 10. And and so moving is almost like a normal for them, as opposed to where they're just constantly in one place. They have one sense of community, because in a lot of instances that does, and again, this is just from my experience, I think it does prevent upward mobility in their career path is if they're not willing to move, right? So we see that also. And then I've seen plenty of scenarios where one of the spouses, husband or wife, goes to the new location, family stays behind, right? And that creates, by the way, I'm in that camp, right? And so, it creates a tremendous amount of disruption for the family. Yep. My wife will frequently say, like, I am a visitor. Right? Like, stay in my lane. But I only share this because it does absolutely impact this conversation of like, what is my vision versus her vision, right? And I think it's really, really important to pull on your comment of the kids are going to move, right? And so if you're really thinking that you want to be somewhere just because the kids are there, this is where I think sequencing the conversation of like how to do this move the right way is really, really important. I'm a big advocate for rent first, right? Like Airbnb or get a 12-month lease, like see how much you really like that area without committing the capital. And especially with how expensive homes are now. I mean, it's estimated on average about 3 years. You need to own a piece of real estate for 3 years just to recover the transaction cost of buying or selling and moving. Sure, there have been instances post-COVID where prices have risen much faster and you can do it quicker, but like in a normalized environment, it's about 3 years. So you're committing a lot of capital, right, and locking up a lot of capital that has opportunity cost to it for an unknown. Like you might not know how much you really enjoy. Now, my wife will tell you on the flip side, by doing that, by let's just say you maintain the house that you have now and then you go and rent something, you still haven't really transitioned, right? And so it's like you still have that reason to come back. And so there is a mental piece to it as well. I personally love the renting though, because it gives you that flexibility.
I cannot recommend the renting more than anything. I have a client that I'm working with. They purchased a home at the beach and they, that's what they wanted to do because they'd been to the beach in June, July, and August. We just had our last discussion. The beach is different in September. Yes. September, December, February. There's no one there.
Yeah.
And the complete vibe that they were expecting is absent. And that's a risk. And so being there, not only renting in the times that you're going to like it, but if we talk about places like Florida or Texas, it's hot in the summer.
Yeah.
Live in the summer and see what it's like. Not necessarily saying, there's nothing wrong with those places, but that's going to be your reality. And so let's confront that. So when you do make the decision and get the keys to the new place, You're confident. You're ready to go.
See, and I like fully committing on that, right? So, because I'm going to pull on my wife's comment, right? Because like, if you're only going to go to Texas for a week in the summer, well, it's okay because you're going to go back to somewhere that's cooler, right? Like, like fully committing and experiencing it. And again, I've seen so many instances where the client that you mentioned with the beach scenario, where they get in, they committed all the capital, and it is just not what they expected. Or I mentioned the healthcare thing, right? Like the beach communities, especially, they do not have good healthcare. Sorry, I'm East Coast beach communities, right? My personal experiences. I had 3 hospital trips in Delaware, and it was just the most abysmal thing, like awful. Driving an hour plus, like it was not good. Sorry. But the point is like factoring these types of things in. Actually, I mean, I'm not going to pick on Delaware, but like that was a great example because Delaware, for me to get on an to take an airplane, I had to drive back to DC to get on an airplane. So it's 2 hours plus, right? So 2 hours plus to get on a flight, land, 2+ hours to get back out to the house. And there were a couple instances over the summers where I needed to get down to Texas or go see a client or something. Like that's a lot of added travel on that, which is why we ultimately decided that wasn't for us either, right?
And I think you bring up a good point earlier in we're not here to say what's right for you or not. It's to help try and map out
Bingo.
What are the conversation points for you to prioritize. For folks that want to spend a lot of time in Europe, we shouldn't live 4 hours from the airport, especially a regional airport where now you're going to have to connect 4 times and it's, there's no right or wrong in this equation. It's just, hey, before we make that decision, what are the ripple effects? What are the ripple effects on the money side, on the travel side, on the lifestyle, and the kid? It's all a puzzle,
Bingo.
But there's no right or wrong answer to this.
And that's why I call it paint that picture. And thing to emphasize is husband and wife paint that picture, right?
Yes.
I have seen instances where one of the two has the dream, and it's a dream for the vacation home somewhere, right? But the other spouse is not remotely aligned. And sure, financially they could afford it, but that creates a lot of friction and a lot of angst in these conversations. And I've even seen an instance where the one spouse moved forward with it, hoping that the other spouse would get on board with it. And then she never did, which, and next thing you know, you've got more friction because you have this asset with the expense profile and, one's using it, the other one's not. Now the one that's using it loves it, right? but yeah, I mean, this is where I think it's really important to make sure that you're having a cohesive conversation.
Totally.
Now, related to this, we want to talk about condos a little bit, right? And this is one where condos can be an absolute blessing, but also an absolute curse. And this is where I like how you framed it, but watch out for the condo trap. And it's one of these things where condos have, in a lot of instances, phenomenal amenities, great pool, fitness facility. Sometimes they have spas and restaurants and all the things. There's a cost to that though. And in some cases, very, very significant cost. So as we're factoring in these decisions and what we're looking to acquire, we also have to look at the cost profile of these. Like I did a case for a client with another one of the advisors here, but they're in Miami and their monthly condo fee is $6,000. The monthly fee, right? And now, I will say that condo fee does cover a lot of things, right? Most importantly, the insurance on the building, right? So they only have to get an HO6 condo insurance policy, by the way. So just real quick, when you buy a condo, usually your condo fee does cover the insurance for the building. You do then have to get what's called an HO6 insurance policy, which is just for the contents in your unit, but not covering the insurance for the building, as an example. But when I think about it, this is a cash flow conversation more than anything else. And especially when you go to states like Florida or Texas, where it's high property tax. So you've got high HOA fee, high property tax. Like the cost of ownership can be really, really, really expensive. We just want to make sure we're factoring all of this stuff in. Now, on the flip side, right? And this is, by the way, I should attest, I'm a condo guy. So, like,
that's one thing with condos, real quick.
Sure.
So, on the financial side, we got you covered. We'll do the stress test. We'll make sure the numbers work. There is something to be said about having a really good real estate team on your side that can go through those contracts to help you understand it's different than rent. You don't just say, I'm going to pay this per month. If anything happens, that's on the building. It's the opposite.
Yep.
You then would have whatever cost you have, but then we're talking about special assessments. Can the condo place change the rules on you? All of that's in the legal documents. And it's very important to do that due diligence because in places, James made this, this may hit home a little too close.
You're punching me in the gut right now.
But in places like Florida, the rules can change.
All the time.
And they're going to change for good or bad reason. We can debate that another time. But that's the reality. And so we do not have a fixed expense structure in that buffer so crucially important. And your real estate team can really help map some of that out for you.
I think a lot of it comes down to like the predictability, right? And so as much as I know all of those things, I'm still in the mindset of I like the access, ease of use, and convenience associated with turnkey, right? So like condo, I literally could show up with my backpack and that's it, right? I don't have to worry about mowing a lawn or changing pool filters or even changing filters in the condo. Like all of that is covered at a price. But to your point on the special assessments, it's all but certain you're going to have a special assessment when you own a condo. You don't know necessarily when it's going to happen. The reason I was chuckling is I got hit twice within 2 months of each other, one for the master association and one for the building. Again, surprises, but ultimately it's all for the greater good of improving the community, yada, 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 yada. And they, the one thing I will say about all these condo buildings now is they are all being inspected because of some of the buildings that have had structural issues. They're all being inspected at a much more scrutinized pace. So all these insurance companies are jacking the premiums up. And then of course these special assessments are getting more and more expensive. Not trying to steer anyone away from a condo. It's just be mindful of the cost profile associated with it. They're not always as inexpensive as you might think just by looking at what the cost to buy the condo is, because there's a lot of carry cost that goes with them. I talk a lot about the stuff and again, I come back to my vision, like a simple life, like purge everything. I love my kids, but it's like their stuff is just kind of taken over the entire house.
Oh yeah.
It's recognizing the type of lifestyle you want to have has a direct implication on that downsize, right? And great example, we love hosting Christmas. There's a ton of stuff from like the trees and the decorations and like, I joke, I'm like, we need a storage facility just for all the Christmas stuff, like just that one holiday. And oh, by the way, my wife loves decorating for every holiday. So it's like, I need a storage facility just for the decorations, right? Is that the type of lifestyle you're going to have when you do this downsize, right? As an example, where the 10-foot tree might not fit anymore. Now you need the 7-foot tree. Now you got to buy new stuff, right? Like normally the things you have in your homes when you do this downsize are not the things that you're going to have when you go to this downsize.
No, and the downsize and the stuff is so important because we talked about preemptive planning and wanting to plan well ahead of time. No one's going to take better care of your stuff than you. No one's going to know what you value other than you. And what we don't want to have happen is you do a downsize and then maybe the kids or the neighbors or even the state in certain cases is going to decide what happens to your stuff. I mean, we don't know. And so having a plan for what that transition is going to look like, where's the stuff going to go? Do you want a storage unit? Do you not? I got a text from a client a few weeks ago doing downsizing, and they texted me a storage locker, which is about 5 by 5. And they said, this is where our entire primary residence is now going to sit in this locker. And that was a reality hit to them of like, oh my gosh, we have a basement full of all sorts of stuff and ain't going to fit. What does that mean? And that's where you really confront, for some folks, I know for my parents, all gone. They need nothing. If they could get a dumpster and just take all of it out, they would. For other folks, that is not going to be the same. And confronting that ahead of time so you are the one making that decision is crucial.
Well, and I think when you spend a long period of time in a home, I mean, I'm just speaking for myself, you accumulate things, right? Like, and if you're not intentional around those purges that happen, moving forces it, right? Like if you're just moving a job move or something like that, I think about like the number of times I've moved in Texas. I have no wife and kids down there. So it's like, I just pick up and go. But that purge, it's like bare necessities. I got a couch, TV, and clothes, right? But the point is that that's an easy one. But when I think about, like, for example, when we get rid of our primary residence that the kids are at, like, oh my goodness. Like, and I can already tell with my 3 kids, and they're little now, but each of them has different things that are important to them. And we would want to make sure that that's an active conversation. So as you're getting into retirement and thinking about this, and especially if you have maturing or adult children, integrate them in the conversation. Like, ask them what is important to them before you go throw it away. I think about, like, all my childhood trophies got thrown away when my parents downsized. And, that was a little hit, right? Like, and no one asked me. It just got thrown away, right? And I think I would have liked to have those to show my kids. I was good at something back in the day. Anyways, all right. So, obviously we've talked a lot about the emotional side of this conversation. Let's transition a little bit and talk about the financial side. Because a lot of clients ask us the question, obviously we're both advocates for the rent first, which that has an expense profile, but that is an expense. We're not making an asset acquisition. But a lot of folks ask us the question of, like, how do I buy that second home or transition home while I still have my primary? And that becomes like one of the biggest roadblocks. And they're like, oh, I got to sell the primary before I can go buy the new house. Let's talk a little bit about that.
So from that perspective, I think it's crucial to manage liquidity. One of the things that is vital for all retirees is managing cash flows. What is the buffer of cash flows that we have? How long could we exist in an environment with both? Do we want to retain both? All of that's going to be dependent on 2 things. Number 1, the actual capacity to fund that. And then number 2, what is your profile for risk? Because in a market like what we've had the past 4 or 5 years, real estate's moving, but that's not always going to be the case. And so if we buy home number 2 without getting rid of home number 1, we may have a little bit of friction there. Some people that they're not going to lose an ounce of sleep over that. Other people might. And so having an adequate plan in place to fund cash flows, understand what the impact of that is going to do on a retirement portfolio, withdrawal rates, it's crucial. And that coordination needs to happen well ahead of time.
Yeah, and I really want to emphasize the plan. Because there's a lot more to this, in my opinion, than just, can I afford it, or do I have the cash flows to it? Because in a lot of instances, it becomes an optimization as well, right? Like, and I have a household right now that we're both helping, that they're moving up to Virginia from Texas, right? So they're almost, in some ways swimming upstream, but the real estate prices up here are significantly more than what their home value is down in Texas. And so then it becomes a conversation of, like, selling the primary right now actually almost has a negligible financial impact relative to how are we going to fund the acquisition of the new home. And then it becomes, all right, first you answer the question of, can I afford it, right? Okay, check that box. But then it's, how do we raise the capital and liquidity to be able to do it? Well, there might be significant capital gains in order to raise the money to be able to get it. That might not be the right tax optimized strategy here. And so, it's one of those conversations where when we go to do the acquisition, you might really want to consider a mortgage, albeit you don't need the mortgage because you have the assets to go acquire it, but just to help us manage some of the cash flow needs, some of the liquidity needs, but also some of the tax implications associated with the acquisition. So again, just something else to consider as we're doing it. We do all of this with a financial plan. And I really want to emphasize the other comment you made, doing it well in advance. Because these decisions do have consequences, right? And I know I've been kind of cavalier about this conversation, but the point is like, we need to model the implications of each of these decisions as they're being thought through. And right now we're talking about the decision of mortgage, no mortgage, right? And what does that do to someone's long-term plan? But one thing we didn't mention earlier, which is really more in that financial category, is if someone is moving to some states, the tax profile changes on your plan, right?
Totally.
And so one of the things I love that we do very, very well, obviously biased, but we do very, very well is we can take your scenario and then model it state by state by state. So like we have clients that looked at 5 or 6 different states as where they were considering because they've got kids there, family there, whatever the reason is, where we're modeling in parallel what is that happens, assuming everything stays constant on their expense profile, but then it's what does Tennessee look like? What does Florida look like? What does Nevada look like? Right? Like, and looking at each one next to each other, and clients got really, really comfortable with that.
One of the things I tell folks all the time is we just have to run your numbers.
Yes.
In retirement and with the way that media has evolved, there are a ton of influencers that would say, we'll only live in these states.
Yes.
Only do this in retirement. Don't have a mortgage, do have a mortgage. I'll give you an example. There's a state in Delaware, more tax advantageous for retirees in most cases. Working with a client, that client was that we couldn't shake them. They were like, Delaware is the best place for us to be. And then we finally got them to do the numbers, and we found out a house in Delaware, same size, same square foot, same amenities, access to water, all that stuff, was $800,000 more than Maryland. And when you do a comparison, sure, you lose a little bit of taxation benefits on the retirement side. The real estate cost on the other side is going to completely offset that. And so it's not as simple as saying Texas, Florida, Delaware, Tennessee, some of these are the best states, we have to live there. Cost of living matters a lot when you talk about Texas to Virginia, other sources. And so doing your own plan and your own customization is the best way to lead confidently into this decision, as opposed to using rule of thumbs.
And don't be afraid to run multiple scenarios, right? Like I love how like our advisors get on in real time. Like they're changing things while we're sitting there and someone's saying, what happens if this? What happens with that? Right? Make sure that you're very, very comfortable with all of the implications of the decision, because this is a decision that has material consequences, emotionally and as well financially. A couple other things. I wanted to emphasize the point that you made around risk profile and comfort level. Obviously, this is something that's going to require capital to be able to make this decision and the transition. And there might be a period of time that you are going to fund 2 houses. That has an emotional stress as well as a financial stress. This is why the plan, in my opinion, is so important, right? Like, make sure that we're understanding that these are decisions that we're making intentionally with a lot of guidance associated with it. The one comment that I will say, though, is I tend to not look at a home as an asset for accumulation purposes. Like I don't buy a house because I'm hoping to make a lot of money on that house. It's the place I live. And if I go into it that framework and I happen to make some money off of it when I'm done with it, so be it. Now, my wife will tell you, because I'm a bottom line guy and I do look at the numbers. If I'm walking into something where I'm losing money immediately, I'm extremely uncomfortable and not able to move forward with that type of decision. And so, make sure that we're factoring in all the economics here.
You brought up something that's so important. It's often missed. We do a lot of work in preparing net worth statements for clients, understanding what the balance sheet looks like, what the construction is. It's great to see a big net worth number. If a lot of that's being driven by the primary residence, fantastic. It means we have pretty meaningful home equity. Can't draw on that home equity for retirement. Cannot use your retirement easily. Yes, easily.
Yeah.
It's not a place that we're going to be able to take cash flows from.
Nope.
Not saying we shouldn't have nice primary residencies, but we really need to be thinking about what's the liquid portfolio. If we do downsize, what's the impact to my liquid portfolio? Because that's the nuts and bolts of how we make sure the retirement plan has sufficient longevity for a very long time.
In general guidance here, like I've had clients ask us the question of like, how much of my net worth should be in my primary residence, right? And that is such a hard question to answer, simply because each and every one of us are different, right? And it's easy to look at the absolute, like, and real estate prices have astronomically risen, right? But let's just say it's a $2 million home, which is a very, very expensive home. But if your net worth is, let's just say 5 million, I'm going to say you're potentially a little out of balance when you're in retirement, right? Like that's 40% of your net worth in your primary residence. And so what I try to tend to do is a guidance of anywhere from 10 to 30%. 30% if you still have active income streams, whereas 10, I like that being kind of when you're no longer working and in that deaccumulation phase, right? And then it just becomes subjective based upon net worth, right? Mm-hmm. Like that tends to be the goalpost. And you mentioned it early on in our podcast, but it's really important when you're in that early phase of life, your house is your primary asset. It's probably your main asset, right? Like, and so the asset profile is dramatically imbalanced. But when we move to retirement, it dramatically shifts. And I love the idea of making sure that we're thinking of it in the context of a total net worth perspective. One thing too to factor in when you're making these decisions is, are there upgrades going to be needed? And what are the costs of those and how are we funding those? Are we going to be able to bake that into the acquisition price? Do we need to have additional capital ready to go? And I will say this from experience, every client I've ever worked with that's had to do upgrades or renovations, it's always lower than what they think it's going to be is always lower than what it really ends up being. And then in almost every instance, when you acquire the new home, you're buying new furniture, blinds, decor, like all the things. And next thing you know, the cost profile is materially risen. So that's another great example when, as we're doing the planning, let's stress test it. Let's do some sensitivity testing. Make sure that we're assuming and factoring all of this in. On those lines, like when we go to sell the asset, let's just say we're in the house that we've been in for 15, 20 years. The way our tax structure is written is you get $250,000 of capital gains tax-free. So if you're married, that's $500. And that's the main thing there is that you have to have that as your primary residence 2 of the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. So you can sell the house, you can move out of the house and be gone for 3 years and then still sell it and take advantage of that as long as it was both spouses' primary residence. So like I'm in another state from my wife, right? So we only get $250,000 on the gain of our house in Virginia when we sell it because it's only been my wife's, whereas I've been in another state.
The common question that keeps popping up with that is, hey, if I make it a rental, let's say a rental, because we're doing some of the bridging we talked about where we buy the second one before the first, that's going to change that calculus completely.
It is.
And so understanding, hey, I may pick up some rental income, but if we're in turn losing $500,000 of a gain exclusion, this is where that coordination on the financial planning side can really map out and say, hey, this is great today. On the back end of this, we're exposing more tax liability or friction or risk. And so this is kind of a testament to this is why we do the plans. This is why we stress test and want to do as many scenarios as we can think of so we're eyes wide open making good decisions.
But on that line too, like if you're in the position where you're putting improvements into the house, make sure you keep a record of every single dollar that you've put into that home. And that's everything from new roof, new appliances, new mechanicals, right? Like all of those, if you added a patio, fireplace, like all the stuff that you've done to the house to make it what you want, that all needs to go into your cost basis number. Especially, and this really matters if you've got a gain over 500. So again, just things to think about as you're preparing and not to beat a dead horse, but that's why we do the planning work. All right. We went a little over on this one, but I think, it's a very common conversation we're having with a lot of our clients. I really appreciate being able to have a fluid conversation with you, Patrick, on it. And I think hopefully this was of value for the audience, but thank you all for taking some time to listen to our podcast today.
The previous presentation by Bogart Wealth was intended for general information purposes only. No portion of the presentation serves as the receipt of or as a substitute for personalized investment advice from Bogart Wealth or any other investment professional of your choosing. Different types of investments involve varying degrees of risk, and it should not be assumed that future performance of any specific investment or investment strategy or any other non-investment related or planning services, discussion, or content will be profitable, be suitable for your portfolio or individual situation, or prove successful. Neither Bogart Wealth's investment advisor registration status nor any amount of prior experience or success should be construed that a certain level of results or satisfaction will be achieved if Bogart Wealth is engaged or continues to be engaged to provide investment advisory services. Bogart Wealth is neither a law firm nor accounting firm, and no portion of its services shall be construed as legal or accounting advice. No portion of the podcast content should be construed by a client or prospective client as a guarantee that he or she will experience a certain level of results if Bogart Wealth is engaged or continues to be engaged to provide investment advisory services. Copies of Bogart Wealth's current written disclosure brochure and Form CRS discussing our advisory services and fees are available upon request or at www.bogartwealth.com.